Great. All right.
Okay, hello everybody. Nice to be here another year. So yeah, my name is Eduardo, Posva on GitHub and Twitter. And I'm the author of VueRouter, Pinia, VueFire, and other small libraries on Vue. I've been on the core team for a long time now. It's been like 8 years. I think it's crossed that 8 years mark. And during this journey, I have worked in many different projects. And I have faced very different problems because from Vue 1, even pre-Vue 1, to Vue 3, the problems have evolved a lot. And usually I have solved them, except for one that escaped me a little bit, which is data fetching. And it's not like data fetching is my nemesis or it haunts me in nightmares or anything like that. But I felt like every time I've encountered a project that has this data fetching, they always have their own little abstraction that works really well for them and is optimized for what they do. And probably it's also because there is no standard way of handling data fetching in Vue applications. So let me show you some of the most common ones, abstractions I've seen around. The first one, and by far the most common one, is using a client-only watch. So it's very simple and a very simple, effective way to fetch data. For example, in this one, we are using using the route param to fetch, I think it's user information or some data, yeah, with ID. And I want to know who has used this pattern before. Can you raise your hands? A few hands, 10, 20 maybe. So it's very simple, it's very easy to customize, and that's what's key to this approach. We can add a loading state if we want, if we need. We can do the same to add some error handling. And this is because everything is on the component itself, right? We are inside of the component. We don't need to learn anything new. We're just using Vue API at this point. So we can use the whole component data is at our service. But it has two major downsides. First, it's client-side only. So if we do SSR, the page is not gonna fetch before rendering. So we're gonna send to the client the page without fetching. And then when the component, or rather the page mounts, then it's gonna fetch the data. So that's a shame if you want, or you need SSR. And it's also quite verbose. Of course, you can abstract this to a composable, but I have to say I have seen projects without creating any composable for these and just having a bunch of loading states all around. And that's how they handle it. So for most projects, this is fine, right? Most projects, I would say, were not using SSR, where they didn't require service generation or anything like that. But what if you do? So if you do, normally the projects I've seen, they will use suspense. Now, who has used suspense for data fetching? That includes so Nux, usually you have suspense. So you use Nux, that's a yes. Okay, like 5 to 10, more or less. So this approach is very simple and intuitive, right? We just put a wait, great. And it works without the router, which is something that we often forget, because most applications, if you have at least more than one page, you're gonna use the router. But it's still worth saying. And the main issue it has is that we depend on mounting the component completely in order to do the fetching, okay? So it might not seem like a big deal at first, but it has quite a few big downsides. First, foremost, is cascading fetch. So if you have any nested fetching, nesting await, you first need to do the parent await in order for the child to even start, which most of the time it's a shame because when you do data fetching, most of the time the fetchings are unrelated. So you could just launch them right away and parallelize the fetching. There is no preloading as such. If you want to preload, you kind of have to mount the component while you're still displaying your page, which in some cases, depending on the device the user is on, is not even possible. And depending on the page, how heavy they are, it can be very, very laggy. And there is no watching or automatic refetch of the resource that you're getting. In order to refetch, you need to, well, remount the whole component again. Now, you can achieve this with a key attribute on the router view, of course, but in some scenarios, if your page is heavy enough, this is not something you can afford also. And We also have Composables approach. So this includes Pina Colada, but also VueQuery, Swerve, and in a way, we can include Next, use Async, data, use fetch in that. Who has used the approach? Okay, like 5 to 10 again. So I wonder what the other people are using. You have to tell me afterwards. The good part of this approach is that it's usually feature rich. So each composable can abstract the useful features that are specific to your application, some less than others. But it can come with cache, request duplication, optimistic updates, and way more. The limit in the end is just your imagination, right? Whatever you can implement, you do it. It's usually very concise, especially when you compare it with a watcher, right? Because you are abstracting everything into the composable. So in this case, we use the use query composable. There is no await, and we're good to go. And that brings me to the last point. Usually, you have SSR support. For example, with use query, you just use it, and it uses on-server prefetch behind the scenes, so it just works. With Next, you have await in front, and it uses suspense, so it just works. And I think with VueQuery, you have to use an await suspense, something like that. Swerve, if I recall correctly, doesn't support SSR. So it's another story. And last but not least, we have navigation guards. So navigation guards, implementation vary depending on your project. But the general idea is looking like this. You have a custom meta property. In this case, we have a function that is called data, and is going to fetch some data, right? Some information we need. We return the promise in there. Then we consume that into a navigation guard. And I'm not doing it here, but you have to put that data somewhere, right? You have to put that into a store or a global property, a global reactive object that is accessible in your application. Now, I want to know who has used an approach similar to this. It doesn't have to be this exactly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like around 5% more or less. 5 to 10, I would say. So this has other advantages. It's so different from the other's approach. Because we are in a navigation guard, we can control the outcome of the navigation. So compared to the other solutions, they just cannot do that. You have to, on mounting, redirect the user or show an error if you want. But here, for example, if the user doesn't have access to a resource, we can, redirect them to the login page. Or if you are like GitHub with private repos, you just show a 404. It's up to you. And also, because we are integrating the data fetching within navigation, we can get more accurate metrics regarding our page loads. Now, this is something usually people overlook, but especially with client-side applications, because when you have SSR, well, you still have the server-side time to reply, right? You can have these metrics. But when your users are navigating from one page to another, if the navigation is instant and the loading happens afterwards, you are not able to see which pages are taking longer to load, right? Whereas if you integrate the data fetching within the navigation, then you know which pages are slower or feel slower, which is, in my opinion, more important for user-facing applications, how it feels. So, and lastly, we should be able to, so I say we should because it's still not available even though it has been 5 years, but the idea is we can be lazy, which it's the case for most developers, and we can add some global loading state. So we implement that once and we reuse it across the application. We don't need to add anything else. The idea is that in the future, the browser will gives us that loading state. So you know how when you visit a page, you have that spinning thing, and on the phone it looks different. So the idea is that in the future, with the navigation API, we should be able to get into that part of the UI as well. Right now, we don't, so we implement our own CSS bar, you know, like the GitHub one. A lot of people have that. I do that in my application as well. But there are other downsides to this approach. We cannot use component data. We are completely outside of the component. We have no relationship to the component whatsoever. And so we need a store to put the data, which it's a small limitation, but it's still one. So these 4 examples allow me to say 2 things about data fetching. First, it's a complex topic. It is partially handled, yet it is needed by almost every single application. And yet, there is no standard way to do it. There is no standard way to have data fetching in your application in a way that scales, right? That adapts to the needs of your application. And the main drawback, in my opinion, of these solutions is that there is none of them that allows you to collocate the data fetching logic. So by data fetching logic, I mean calling the APIs to get something, and being navigation aware. So by that, I mean changing the navigation, canceling the navigation, throwing an error, unexpected errors, stuff like that. To the point where we can ask ourselves, is this even really possible to collocate both of them? So today I'm excited to introduce what I believe could be the future of data fetching in Vue, which is data loaders. Now to get started with data loaders, we have this plugin, data loader plugin, that is going to add that navigation guard that I showed you before. A little bit more complex than that, of course, behind the scenes, but the idea is the same. We need a way to hook into the navigation cycle, right? And so the plugin gives us that part, and then we can just start defining a loader. So the loader is a function, define loader, that allows us to return a composable. It's similar to define store in Pinia. So define a loader, in this case we have a function that allows us to fetch the data. The function receives the location we are going to, the route. So the route is going to have params, query, and usually you want to use that information to fetch whatever you need. Most of the time, the ID, search, query params, etc., etc. That way, if the user refreshes the page, shares the page with someone, they end up on the same page. It's a good practice. One thing you might notice, though, is that we have two scripts. Now, I want to say it's not the only way to do it, but it's the way I'm going to show today because it's easier. And one of the goals of, well, in Vue APIs that we do, and I think it's really nice, is that we have a progressive approach to things. So you can start quite simple with things and still have a powerful tool, powerful baseline tool, I would say. And then we can still have the possibility to adapt to larger scale applications. So we have patterns. We are not blocked by the way we write the applications. We are not blocked by having to write it this way. So we have two script tags. We have the regular one and the setup. So we define the fetching, the loader, within the first script here with the function, as I said, and it returns this composable. So that's why I name it use something. In this case, I think it's user data, yeah. And so this composable, we have to also let the router know that it's attached to a page. That way, the router can load the data, or rather run the loader wherever we go to this page. So what we do is we export the loader. We export the loader from the page. Again, this is the basic version, but with Vite, we can just do this for you if you're using the loader anyway. So there are ways to even completely skip this part. But the basic implementation and the idea is that you have to let the router know that this page is using this data loader. And the good part is that we can use this composable absolutely anywhere. Other components outside of the tree, like upper components, it doesn't matter. And it still runs only once. The data still runs only once. There is no there is a deduplication of request, and you are not limited to the page. You can even not use the data in the page if you want to, right? You can use it in a lower component. And it gives us access to a few properties. The first one of them is, of course, the data, which is what we return on the function, the most important part. We have a loading state that is going to go from false to true if we reload the data. Then we have the error. So it gives us access to an error thrown by the loader. I'm going to talk about these more in detail later on because it's a bit more complex. And last but not least, we have reload, which is a way to re-trigger the loader without a navigation. So it still uses the current location where we are at, right? We need that location to fetch. But we don't need to trigger all the other guards, right? We just need to refetch what we have, refresh the data. So I was talking about navigation aware before, and here, since we're navigation aware, we can control the outcome of the navigation. This is a big deal, in my opinion, because very often we want to have, and specifically when you have edge cases, and this is usually the worst, right? The edge cases, oh, I need to add this ugly code to handle this. This is out of the box. We can just handle the navigation very similarly to navigation guards. So first of all, if the loader throws, that's an error, the navigation is canceled, the error propagates up, and we can display that in a boundary upwards. But differently from regular navigations, if we want to control the outcome of the navigation itself, for example, redirecting on or just aborting the navigation with return false, we cannot just return false or return the new location, right, /login. We need to wrap it with an object that lets the router, or rather data loaders, know this is a specific kind of object. It's not data. And so the router is going to check for these navigation results in order to control the outcome of the navigation. And now you can either return them or throw them, depending on the priority of the result. Throwing has higher priority. I mean, it simply takes over completely all the results that are returned. But that's not about it. Being navigation aware is not just about controlling the outcome of a navigation, and this is where things get really interesting in my opinion. It's also about consistency. So you know when you use a watcher, for example, you might have things updating at different times. And because you are, for example, navigating from one page to another page that are, in fact, the same page displaying the details that are different, like a different user information, you might end up with parts of the data that is still loading and it's inconsistent. So you might have old data with new data on the same page because you have different fetches happening on the same page. Of course, we can write smaller, like small loading spinners and stuff like that to show that some parts are still loading. But it's still kind of annoying and it's not that easy to handle. Let me show you with a demo. So, okay, I can see. This demo is using watchers. So like the first example Like the first example I show you. So we can toggle between two profiles here. This is the URL since I don't have a browser UI to show you. And you will notice something that when I go to another profile, the information charges at different times. So you see that first I have the picture, the name, and then I have the followers. So the follower count, sorry. I force the follower count to take 2 seconds and the profile information to take 500 milliseconds, just to show some things here. So when we switch between one or the other, for a little bit of the time, we have a out of date, like the page is partially incorrect. So this is what I'm talking about. Now, also the URL changes immediately when I click on the link, even though the information displayed is being different. Now let me show you how it works with data loaders. So the thing is, I think, let me just test a little bit. I cannot see the screen very well. Can you see the blue bar on the top? No? Okay. Yes? Maybe? So that's the global loading state that I was talking about. Maybe it's not visible because it's just a blue bar, but it's not important. The idea is that there is a blue bar that appears, and when I click here, the URL doesn't change until we have everything ready. Okay? And so here, if you pay attention to the follower count, it changes at the same time as the information. So we are not going to have a inconsistent partial date of the page with this approach. But sometimes, so in these, especially with these kind of scenarios, what if we don't want to wait for that very slow data to be there? So this is where lazy loaders come into play. So it's perfect for non-critical data. We just need to add that lazy true to the loader. And it has a few implications. So first, a lazy loader is still triggered during the navigation, but it's not awaited, right? And because it's not awaited, it cannot change the navigation itself either. So any thrown error, which will usually cancel the navigation as well, will appear on the error property. That means that we can, or we probably should, display or handle the error in a more granular fashion, right, inside of the page instead of the global error boundary. And this is the best part, it still follows consistent updates. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm back on the page where I was before, and I can turn any of the loaders lazy. Okay, so if I turn the follower count, which is the one that takes 2 seconds, I'm going to find that it looks a lot like the watcher version. So I go to another page, and you can see the follower count is outdated. Now, of course, you can change that by adding a loading message if you want. You can do that with watchers as well. Now, the interesting part is when we have the opposite scenario. In real-world scenarios, you don't control which APIs are going to be faster or not. Sometimes the critical data takes shorter time or takes longer time than other non-critical data. You cannot control that. So here what happens is that the navigation is still going to take 2 seconds because the follower count still blocks the navigation, but the profile information only takes 500 milliseconds. And even though we have that information ready, it still waits until everything is ready because we're still in the context of navigation. So even the lazy loader is able to be navigation aware. Even though it's not able to control it, it still realizes that when it's finished, the navigation that started it didn't finish. So it needs to delay the update of the data. And anywhere we're using that data in our page, we don't see a partially updating page. So we don't get in this scenario where we have a new data in an old page, which is kind of weird for the user. So let's talk real quick about why. I mean, I pretty much say, but let me talk more a more real-world scenario. So in this example, I have 2 loaders. I have use artwork details and use artwork related artist. So the first one is obviously the information the user came for. They want to see who did this sculpture, this painting, related, like the tags, some description, and maybe related artist is not as important. So it's better if we just show a loading spinner for that, and we display the page as soon as we can. That's the important part with the picture of the artwork and whatever. This has a few implications, of course. So the artworks that we see that we return in the use artwork details are always defined. So you don't need to use v8, for example, right? In the type definition, you don't have undefined as a value. But on the other hand, related artists, because they are lazy, they can be undefined when we enter the page. So that is reflected in their type definition. Now, this is just, in my opinion, a pragmatic and practical way of differentiating between critical and non-critical data. So you could even say critical instead of lazy if you want for the options. It will be, in my opinion, very similar. But it brings another topic, error management. Because, as I said, when you have a lazy loader, it always propagates the error into the error property, but never up, right? But a blocker, so a non-lazy loader, doesn't do that. So the error is always going to be empty, right? Because it always just throws and blocks the navigation, except for reloading the data, because that's a bit different. So how do we do error management? For non-lazy loaders, we can actually define the expected errors with an errors property. So this allows us to differentiate any error that we inspect, and everything else is like, I don't know what this is, so just let the error boundary handle that. But we can handle that error locally. So we have both the global handling and the local handling for the data fetching. And we have the control over what is local and what is global. And so everything else, by the way, appears on router on error. This is just the default behavior for any error thrown on a navigation guard. So with this, we have code collocation in a way. Of course, we still have to differentiate the data fetch and the component data because we need to be able to run this outside of the component. This is important for preloading. We have consistent updates, deduplication, lazy loading, and error management. But what about the other features like the cache that I was talking about or optimistic updates and everything I mentioned about composables? So I have a small confession to make, actually. There is no define loader. This is a lie. What I've been talking about all this time is actually called define basic loader. It's not a big difference. But the define basic loader represents the baseline implementation for define loader. It's the simplest version. It's just a function that returns the data. Cannot get that simpler than that. And data loaders can also be integrated with other libraries. So, like, for example, Pina Colada. And in this case, I named the loader define Colada loader. Why not? And this one, instead of taking a function, takes an object, which is the object you pass to use query with the options from data loaders, like a mix of both. So you get best of both worlds. We have the loaders, but also all the features that come with Pina Colada. So for example, in Pina Colada, you need to specify a key for the cache, for the client cache. It's required. And in this case, it's a bit different because we get access to the route location as well, which is not something we get with plain Pina Colada because it doesn't depend on the router. And then we have also other options. So for example, we can add a stale time. This allows us to say the data is going to be stale after X amount of milliseconds. Before that, it's still fresh. So if you try to refresh the data, don't do anything, just reuse the cache. And so we avoid fetches, and UX is very smooth. And of course, we can augment also what is returned by the composable. So for example, we had this reload function before I show you, and Pina Colada also has a refresh function. So they're very similar, but the difference is related to the stale time. A refresh function is only going to reload the data if the stale time has been elapsed. So it's a more convenient function, I would say. So define loader is actually a spec, and we currently have 2 implementations. We have the basic one, so you just have functions, no cache, nothing fancy, and the feature-rich one, which is for more advanced apps, although the cost of using it in a simple app is so low that you can as well use it for small apps, which is the Pina Colada one. But the idea is we can imagine more implementations in the future, right? The idea of the API is that by being a spec, you can combine all the libraries, your favorite libraries with it. So VueQuery, WebSockets, VueFire, GraphQL, whatever you want. And I've been saying Pina Colada a lot. It's not the cocktail, obviously. It's this library I've been working on for the past year. Now, it's a library that is built on top of Pina stores. So it uses Pina stores and plugins to handle all the logic. And it's like adding the async state management to the state management. It works without the router, also it's important to say. It's just different projects. It gets confusing because I often talk about them at the same time, but they are not directly related, right? They just complement each other. But I do think it's the perfect companion for the data loaders when you want a very nice UX experience. Let me give you a small demo. Now, I don't know how bad or how good my network is, but I don't think it's that great. This is a small artwork, actually, API. Public API from Chicago Institute of Art. And so I can search for artworks here, and it takes a little bit of time. There is a small blur because the images is just CSS effect, and I can navigate through pages, and it takes a little bit of time. You cannot see the line on the top, but it's there. And you will notice that when I go back, this is instant because it's in the cache. So this is one of the many benefits of using something like Pina Colada, or more specifically the loader. Here, so the slides are all online, and I will share them after the talk. But here are all the links that I will encourage you to test out, especially the demos. You can try out with different network connections, give them a try. I think the data loaders API really improves the game for data fetching. It has a lot of features that allows you to have a performance-first approach to data fetching that is simple enough to use it right away, and you can progressively enhance with more options as you keep growing your application. I had a summary here, but there is a bug with the slides, so it's just the links twice. And I want to finish by saying, if you're interested in learning how it works, I actually built Pina Colada starting from an exercise on my Master in Pina course. So if you want to just dive a little bit more into that, learn about state management and Vue, give it a try. I've left a couple of stickers of Pina Colada around. I don't know if you have seen them. I also have some pins that I will just leave in around as well. I don't have that many, so I cannot give to everybody. But I will try to give to more people as I can. And thanks for your time. Thanks for having me.
All right. I'm going to scoot over just a sec so we can set up the...
You want to?
Yeah. All right. We have a handful of minutes for questions if anybody has any questions for Eduardo here. All right. We've got a few in the back here.
Hi. Thanks for presentation. That was great, and lots of materials to think how we can spend our nights instead of sleeping. My question is about defining loaders. So I see the second or zero script section, And it makes me thinking, like, would it be possible, maybe at some point in the future, that we can define our loaders in different places? So far it seems like it should be in a Vue component, but would it be possible for storing it in composable or state manager files? So, what are plans on that? Thank you.
I was like waiting for the mic, sorry. Yes, it's actually already possible. And to be honest, I show this version because I have the single file, but for my projects, I personally like to have the loaders in another folder, and I export them from that folder, and then I use them in the pages. So there is an extension from unplugging Vue Router, because currently the data loaders lives in unplugging Vue Router. Eventually, it will become part of Vue Router, I believe, but the benefit is that it doesn't add up to the router if you don't use it. It's an extra. And so for organization purposes, you can, and I believe you should, as you grow your application, move the data loaders to another folder and export them from that file. It just makes things easier to test as well. And then you can import it everywhere you need. It just makes the relationship so much easier, improves for code splitting as well a little bit. Not too much, but a little bit.
And then back there in the middle?
Yes, hello, thank you. What about side effects? So I'm wondering if, for example, the result of one loader is affecting the input of another loader. So for example, if I'm accessing the name of a person through an API, and I'm using that name to fetch something from my database, how would that chain of command work?
Yeah, so I don't show it on the talk because I don't have enough time, but it's supported. So you can nest loaders inside, and they still handle all the things I've shown. Inside, so I use the loader in the script setup, right? That's how I've been using it. But there is another usage that I haven't shown, is awaiting the use loader. And when you await the use my loader, instead of giving you an object with all the properties, it gives you only the data. Okay? So what you do is you call a loader inside of the function of the other loader. And it automatically connects them together. So there is some smart detection. For example, I mean, they are connected behind the scenes, and there are smart invalidation happenings. For example, Pina Colada detects what you use from the route, and it will not trigger the loader if you navigate to a different page, for example, a hash. It won't trigger the loader at all. And the nested loaders also invalidate the parents, and so there is this connection that everything is resolved correctly. And I feel that it's the most natural way. You just await, use something, my loader, inside of my other loader. So for example, if you want to get connections of friends for a user, you have already defined one loader for the profile, and inside of the new loader you're writing, let's say it's user friends or whatever you want, friend list, you say const user equals await use user data, and you just do the fetch there with whatever information you need. And it will still deduplicate if you use that loader somewhere else. It's still called only once also.
All right, here's one up in front.
Thanks for the talk, it was amazing. For the define loader example that you showed, when the URL actually only changes when the data fetching is done, what kind of state is the router at that point, in between when you actually trigger the action and when the data is done?
It's still inside of navigation. So there is nothing new, I would say, from the router perspective when it comes to the data fetching. Everything happens within a navigation guard, so you're still delaying the navigation and by consequence, the URL update. That only happens once the navigation is validated, so to say, and you just trigger, and we call behind the scenes history.push state, and that's what triggers the URL update. So we are still in that state. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. So user input would still be possible in this.
Exactly. The page is still there. It doesn't change. The router view is still rendering the same page we are on. It doesn't update.
Gotcha, thanks.
I thought I saw one more maybe in the back. No. All right. Okay, everybody give it up for Eduardo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.